They selectively choose when the principle applies, and otherwise they're actually against the principle. Same thing here. Some of the people, almost all of the people screaming loudest about the Maryland father had absolutely nothing to say about 4 years of 10 million illegal border crossings, deaths in the river, sexual assaults along the path to the United States, all the crimes from Rachel Morin to Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungaray, and the rest of them. They had nothing to say about any of it. They were complicit in it. In some cases, they cheered it on. But all of a sudden, the rule of law, after 4 years of mass scale law breaking, including victimization of Americans, all of a sudden those people care deeply about the rule of law for this one guy who appears to be an illegal immigrant and a dirtbag at the very least. It is hard for me to take that seriously. If you have been consistent, I'll have a listen. If you have not and didn't give a damn about the giant problem, have a seat. I'm really not interested.
I love talking to Guy Benson, and you are going to love this episode. So again, I encourage you, click that subscribe button. Never miss an episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. Please hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Guy is one of my favorite people to talk to. He's smart. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about where the Democrats are. My husband said to me last night, where are the normal Democrats? Sort of the middle of the road, sensible. I know they're out there. Why don't we ever hear from them? So Guy is going to posit on that. We're going to talk about Bill Maher's dinner with the president. We're going to talk about this Maryland dad that may not be the nice, soft creature you've been led to believe that he is. Guy Benson is our guest next. Guy, it is good to see you again. And, you know, it's really just such a boring time in life. There's not much to talk about, but I'll see if I can scratch up some topics. You know what? The first one I want to talk to you about is this Harvard issue. You and I are both big sports fans. And I saw Steve Kerr at a press conference in the last day or two wearing a Harvard shirt. One of the reporters asked him, he's the head coach of the Golden State Warriors for people who don't know, and he's been very vocal on some social issues. And someone said, are you wearing the Harvard shirt in support of what's going on at Harvard? And he said, yes. I think it's ridiculous, but that's par for the course that they're trying to tell this university what they can and cannot teach. What is he missing about this whole thing with Harvard, Guy? It's mind-boggling to me, but what's your reaction to that? So if you're looking to do something to better your health, let me recommend Kimchi One from Brightcore. These are my good friends at Brightcore. Kimchi One. So kimchi, you've heard of it. You don't have to eat a bunch of it. You can just take these Brightcore capsules. Kimchi One packs all the fermented nutrition of kimchi into convenient capsules, arming your gut with over 900 unique strains of probiotics, supporting gut flora and digestion. And I use this product and I recommend it because all health starts in your gut. So putting the right fermented superfood in your gut improves every aspect of your health, your skin, your hair, your mental performance. Kimchi's even been shown to reduce your risk of obesity and promote smaller waistlines. Now, Kimchi One is all natural, made in the USA and non-GMO. And today you can get my exclusive offer just for my listeners, 25% off with code Michele, Michele, 1L. Don't forget that. Go to mybrightcore.com/Michele, Michele. It's Bright, Bright, core, core.com/Michele with 1L. Or you can even call my friends at Brightcore and there's an opportunity to get up to 50% off your order and free shipping. Here's the number, 888-927-5980. One of their educated staff members will figure out if Brightcore and Kimchi are right for you. 888-927-5980. Give them a call or go online. mybrightcore.com/Michele and try Kimchi One. What is he missing about this whole thing with Harvard, Guy? It's mind-boggling to me, but what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised because he is this performative woke guy, right? This is what he does. He's a basketball coach much of the time. Then he uses a lot of his spare time to steep himself in sort of left-wing a left-wing belief and ideology and all of that. So he's like a hardcore partisan who uses his platform to advance what he believes, which is fine. It's a free country. I think he's often wrong. And I think it's very interesting that while he has opinions about everything all the time, when he's been asked about China and the CCP, with a huge market for the NBA in that country, he has interestingly clammed up and has not really had much to say on that front. So, do with that what you will. Look, the idea that Harvard has been turned into a victim here is remarkable to me.
Yeah, it is.
I think there's an argument to be made that the Trump administration is hurting its own cause by going beyond the core issue and saying, oh, well, another problem we have with Harvard is they don't have enough ideological diversity in their hiring. Like they're sort of now starting to add other things into the mix, into the stew here. But at its core, the reason that Harvard and these other schools, these mostly elite so-called schools, are in the crosshairs is because they have allowed systemic, rampant, widespread civil rights abuses against Jewish students to occur on their campuses for the last year and a half. And it's been egregious in a lot of cases. I think the very, very worst have been Columbia and UCLA.
Yeah.
But there are others right down at that very next tier of disgrace, one of which is Harvard, one of which I would argue, especially last year, unfortunately, was my alma mater, Northwestern. I have the pennant up here. It's, I love going there, but man, they've been horrible on this.
Yeah.
They say that they're cleaning it up this year, but what the administration has done, the Trump administration, is they have said, you must take aggressive steps enumerated here to make amends for and to ameliorate and to put an end to these civil rights violations. You can't have anti-Semitic, pro-terrorism mobs terrorizing, abusing, harassing, etc., Jewish students.
Right.
And that has been indulged. It has been tolerated. It has been coddled with certain members of the faculty. It's been participated in at a lot of these schools. And Harvard's now trying to turn this into like an academic integrity and independence issue.
Yeah, it's it's kind of like Mahmoud Khalil turning it into a free speech issue, right? They're conflating these things. And one of the things I saw John Yoo, who's a law professor at UC Berkeley, my alma mater, although I no longer have my diploma, I sent it back. My husband keeps reminding me, can you really say it's your alma mater anymore? But the point is, he was saying no university in America, public or private, is entitled to taxpayer funding.
Right.
And so, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads when they look at Harvard's endowment and saying, why are we subsidizing this? I have been telling you about Sleep Cream for a long time. Have you tried it yet? Remember, you can get free standard shipping on your first order. I'll tell you how in a second. A lot of people are trying Sleep Cream and having the same results I am, which are fantastic. GGM says great product and superior customer service. I can attest to that. These guys are great. They back up their product. And Sandy H says, I use Sleep Cream every night without fail. A few pumps on each of my arms and legs helps me to relax and sleep peacefully all night. That's what I have found. Look, I was kind of skeptical. So someone comes to me and says, hey, we've got this CBD-based cream that you apply onto your skin at bedtime. It'll help you sleep. And I went, okay, I'll give it a try. Why not? I have trouble sleeping. I'm so glad I gave it a try. And I would encourage you to try it too, because they fully guarantee this product. So, if you don't get satisfaction out of it, Sleep Cream will take care of you. The company is sleepcreme.com, sleepcreme.com. And just give it a try. Like I said, they'll back you up if you don't have the success with it that I did, but I think you're going to. So they guarantee it. Go to sleepcreme.com, sleepcreme.com. Use the code GAMEDAY at checkout, and you get free standard shipping off your first order. GAMEDAY, all one word at checkout. Sleepcreme.com. If you're looking for your best night's sleep, go to Sleep Cream, sleepcreme.com. So, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads when they look at Harvard's endowment and saying, why are we subsidizing this?
Yeah, billions and billions and billions of dollars at a lot of these places. Harvard has the biggest one. And I saw one argument made There was a televised debate about this on another network that I don't work for the other day, where there was a Jewish person who was making the case against Harvard and citing, and this was based on what he said, a previous precedent where a Christian school, Bob Jones University, had seen federal funds frozen or yanked in the past because of discrimination happening at that school. So there's precedent for it. And why should the well-being and civil rights of Jews be treated any differently? I mean, you see some of the things that happen. Even at Harvard, there was like this angry mob that descended on a Jewish student at one point while he was just, walking along. There's a whole litany of examples that you can cite, whether it's at that school or others. And if you have these universities cowering in fear for a year and a half of the pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism mob, of the left-wing faculty senate, because they don't want to upset them either, and just sort of letting all of these gross abuses play out, there are going to be consequences. And the Trump administration is saying this is illegal. You cannot have this happen on your campus, setting aside Harvard's illegal admissions practices that the Supreme Court struck down. It's a separate issue.
Right.
I think if the administration focuses specifically on the civil rights of Jewish students and fixing that problem, they're on very stable moral and probably legal ground. You'd have to ask a legal expert about that. And then there's just the taxpayer point that you made, Michele, that's so important. These schools, these are private institutions, and they say, we're a private institution. How dare the government come in and try to tell us what we can and cannot do? I actually agree with that.
Right.
If you've accepted all the strings of federal money, our money, taxpayer money, and then you allow the outrageous disgraces to take place on your campus month after month after month after month, guess what? There's a downside potentially to taking federal money and taking our money. And if those strings attached suddenly are being pulled by people that you don't like, well, you've sort of signed up for this whole game.
Yeah.
So maybe they could cut those strings. They can do whatever they want. They can allow some of these abuses, I guess, with less accountability. Maybe they could, get rid of federal money and replace it with Qatari money.
Yeah. That's a danger, but it certainly could happen. I think I would argue it is happening on some universities. We know that for sure.
We
know that. Yeah. The other part about this that is so striking to me that people can't seem to get their heads around. If you substitute this example of Jewish students with another group, let's say it was Black students being harassed on campus by a bunch of white supremacists, this thing would end in an instant. Why do you think there's this allowance? Does this? It makes me really think, Guy, to get to your point about Qatari money and others, it makes me think that there is something bigger at play or something sinister that the administration, sure, they don't want to cave to their professors and their left-wing students, but is there another sort of master behind this that is controlling this and saying, hey, look, if you crack down on this, our funding's going away too?
Yeah. And by the way, I've seen many videos across multiple campuses where the Hamas mobs show up chanting terrorist slogans, picketing the Jewish Life Center. They're not picketing the Israeli embassy.
Right.
They're not protesting peacefully outside some event where an IDF veteran is there speaking or whatever. They are going to the centers of Jewish life on campus and screaming and harassing those students and screaming terrorist slogans at them. It's very clear that if you had a group of right-wing neo-Nazi Klansmen on campus, if those were even allowed to exist on most of these campuses, and they were regularly showing up at like the one black fraternity and screaming effectively the N-word, or, screaming old slogans of the old South, the idea that would be, you're exactly right. The idea that would be tolerated for a nanosecond by any of these places, it's inconceivable. It would never happen. And, Piers Morgan, who I think is interesting, smart, sometimes very wrong, sometimes very right. He was on Bill Maher's show last weekend, and he sort of cut through a lot of the noise. You mentioned Mahmoud Khalil. He's like, if I, as Piers Morgan, as a younger man, came here from Great Britain and immediately started running a white supremacy organization that harassed Jews, that harassed black people,
Right.
Let's put Jews off to the side.
Yeah.
Harass black people, racism, all this stuff, occupying buildings, vandalism, crimes. And I were the leader of it. And then said, by the way, I want to stay in the U.S., give me citizenship. You have no right to get rid of me. The response from America would be, F off, was what he said. He said the full word on Bill Maher's show. And the whole crowd cheered because it's so obviously true. Like some foreign national comes to our country and leads a white supremacist group to harass and bully black students on campus. And then everyone's like, well, it's just a free speech issue, which it's not because of the criminal activity here.
Yes.
But the idea that we would have some sort of obligation to let that person stay in our country, his group, Mahmoud Khalil, that is dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That's in their own pronouncements in literature. They advertise that as they do all this. It is wild. And I think, to your actual question, some of it is anti-Semitism. Jews forever, I'm not Jewish, I'm a Christian, but Jews forever have been treated differently in basically every society ever, with the exception of the Jewish state of Israel, which I think is why a lot of people hate it so much. It's this irrational, ancient bigotry. It's what it is. That's at the root of a lot of it. I think what's also at the root of it is this really messed up, morally sick infrastructure and hierarchy that we've established in our society recently about grievance and victimhood, and who's higher on the ladder of victim and all of that. And there's been a decision by, for lack of a better term, the high priests of wokeism that Jews don't really count near the top of the list because they're too privileged. Right. And too many of them have skin that is too white. I think it is really literally that basic and sick. So they don't really count as an oppressed minority, even though you can, I think, make a clear case that they are perhaps the most oppressed minority in the history of humanity, because they're too successful and too well-skinned in some cases. Their concerns are less valid, and therefore you have these organizations, whether it's SJP or just left-wing faculty or whatever, where it's like this dogma of leftism that they are separate and different and don't count really as victims. And therefore it's kind of like either open season or, we don't really want to ruffle the feathers of this angry mob because they cause so much trouble. So we're just going to kind of put out weak statements and look the other way and hope that it goes away. And it's disgraceful.
Yeah, it is disgraceful. Getting back to, you used a phrase when you were explaining the Piers Morgan thing here. You said you wouldn't want me in your country. The other people that we don't want in our country are these criminals who have come from a lot of places, primarily, it seems, South America. And we've got a guy, a Maryland dad, that the left is championing now. So much so that a senator from Maryland, and I don't even want to say his name, but he's flown down there to El Salvador to try to bring this guy home, even though we know this. Home. Exactly. Home. He's an El Salvadorian. He's been here illegally. He's beat his wife, whether he's his common law wife or they're actually married. He is alleged, and I think it's pretty well proven, a member of MS-13. It's apparent now, I guess, a newspaper in Tennessee alleges that he was trafficking people here. And suddenly in the state where Rachel Morin was brutally raped and murdered, that state's senator is saying, let's bring this other guy back because he didn't get fair treatment. What has happened to the Democrat Party?
Yeah. So a couple things. I saw the Media Research Center did an analysis, and I can let me try to pull it up real quick so I get the exact number correct.
Yeah.
This goes to the media and the media coverage of the two stories that you just mentioned in that juxtaposition. I know it's okay. Here we go. Over the last week, the Rachel Morin murder trial, like the killer was tried. They Media Research Center looked at the main networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, what their news programs did and devoted to coverage of the Rachel Morin killer trial versus to the Maryland dad situation. Combined, those three networks have devoted 64 minutes and 57 seconds, so almost 65 minutes, over an hour, to coverage of Maryland Dad, the illegal immigrant deported. 0 minutes to the killer of Rachel Morin. So that's one, I think, illustrative example of the priorities.
Let me just add to that when Rachel Morin's mom was in the press briefing room at the White House yesterday, CNN and MSNBC did not cover it. Fox News, the place that employs you, covered it live, beginning to end. The others two didn't air it. They had more important things to air, I guess. And
we are airing much of it on my show today. I'm going to talk about it on my show today as well, at GuyBensonShow.com, just to plug there. But it's important. And listening, honestly, it was really hard to listen to.
It was.
Describing the physical acts that occurred to this young woman in her final moments at the hands of an illegal immigrant, gang member, homicidal lunatic who had no right to be in the country, and who targeted her on a running trail where she went many, many times and raped and murdered her in the most vicious way imaginable. And to hear her mother explain it in excruciating detail was brutal. And then she talked about the Senator Van Hollen from Maryland, who, when her daughter was murdered, that's a U.S. citizen constituent of his, murder happened in that state, he put out a brief press statement. That was it. Now, for the Maryland Dad,
he never contacted her, correct?
No contact, nothing.
No phone call, no piece of mail, no visit.
Like a little 2-sentence press statement. That was the end of it. Same guy who has flown himself down to, or we have paid for him to go down to El Salvador to do this whole fact-finding mission into Preen and to have all the, the cameras there, and he's doing what he's doing. All right, so I have sort of complicated views on this, so I'll try to lay them out pretty succinctly for you, Michelle.
Fair enough.
You asked about it. I think that the Trump administration is in the wrong in the sense that there was a standing order, as my understanding, standing order from a judge that had been previously looking at and had adjudicated this guy's case that found, by the way, that he is an illegal immigrant. They kind of move right past that. The Maryland Dad is in the country illegally and doesn't have a right to be here. That needs to be said. He was not given legal status. He was not given protection from deportation. What he was given was an order that he couldn't be deported back to El Salvador specifically, his home country. He's a Salvadoran national. And it seems that the reason was rival gang concerns that his physical safety could be in jeopardy if he were sent back to that country, which would make him eligible for deportation elsewhere, but not to that country. Trump administration deported him back to that country anyway. They admitted in legal documents that they had done so in error. They said there was this administrative mistake, and there were lawsuits. Eventually, the Supreme Court said 9-0 that the lower court judge that had just ruled on it had overstepped, saying that the Trump administration had to effectuate or bring about this man's return to the United States. But the justices also said unanimously that the Trump administration had to facilitate his return. So two different verbs that mean different things. There's an argument whether they've done anything to try to facilitate it. The El Salvadoran president was just in the Oval Office and said, I'm not sending him back. And Trump's like, all right, end of story. So there was no attempt really by the Trump administration. They don't want him back. They didn't want to do it. Whether that satisfied facilitation, people are arguing about that. Whether the courts still have jurisdiction over what is now primarily a diplomatic matter. You've got a foreign government with a member of their own citizenry now imprisoned in their country. Can we actually force them to do something?
Right.
And can the courts try to force the executive branch, which has full supremacy over foreign policy, to do something?
And the argument, real quick, I just want to interject that the people have said, don't you think if President Trump turned to the El Salvadoran president and said, Bukele, and said, hey, I need him back, that he would acquiesce and send him back?
I think that's true. Because he's been very cooperative. The Salvadorans have been extremely cooperative. They've got a very close relationship. Trump, Rubio, they all know this guy very well. They have sent some people back from El Salvador, others. And so I feel like if Trump called this guy or in the Oval Office or in private said, look, our courts told us we've got to do this. We need to send him back. We're going to immediately deport him to somewhere else, but we can't have him in your country. Right. Can you do us a solid? We've got a great. I think he would say yes, but I don't think Trump wants to do that. And so Bukele is more than happy to say no and then sort of leave it there.
Yeah.
I am uncomfortable with this just because I think the rule of law needs to matter. And if a judge said you can deport the guy, but not to that country, and then we admitted in writing in court documents that we then sent him in error to that country, and then the Supreme Court says try to facilitate the return and kind of they don't.
Yeah.
I don't like that fact pattern. So that's one part of what I think about this. What I also think about this is the man was in the country illegally. He has no right to be here. The fact that he married and had kids complicates things maybe like on a familial level and maybe on a moral level, but on a legal level, it does not and should not, because we can't incentivize illegal immigration. So this guy, there's allegations, and I know some immigration courts have determined that he was a part of MS-13. I've also seen counterpoints that it's at least like sketchy evidence. It's unclear one way or the other. There's the trafficking allegation. I'm not sure about the evidence underlying that either. What I do know is he's in the country illegally, and this new information, which was unearthed by Andy Ngo, the investigative journalist, because I almost wonder if the Trump administration slow-rolled this one to get the whole news media and the Democratic Party lining up behind this guy. Maryland father, innocent, how could you? And then, 5 days into this, whatever it's been, a week into this, it's like, oh, guess what?
Yeah.
The wife, the Maryland wife of this guy, who actually is a U.S. citizen, on at least 2 occasions filed protective orders against him because of intense, aggressive spousal abuse, physical abuse, feared for her safety, applied for protective orders and got them on at least 2 occasions. So whether this guy might be MS-13, he was determined to be, which is just disturbing. I mean, there's also the evidence to me that if you can't send him back to El Salvador because of rival gang concerns, that would suggest he was tied into that somehow. Rival gangs would suggest you're in the other one. But at the very least, illegally in the country with multiple protection orders against him from his wife, which is all part of this big sob story. And I know she's been participating in it as well.
She is. This
guy, I don't know why we would say this is a good person who we want to remain in our country. He broke our laws to came here, and then apparently beat and intimidated a woman repeatedly.
Yeah, God only knows what kind of pressure she's under right now to be serving up these platitudes about him and say, I want to see him again and all of that.
And she can say that, and who knows what's happening in her heart. What we do know is what she had filed with the authorities at least twice, which was, I am deadly afraid of this man who is physically hurting me. So to me, that is someone who should not be in the country. If we can't send him to El Salvador, fine, let's follow that law, but send him somewhere else. We do not want him in this country. And I think for Chris Van Hollen et al. To have made this man into their cause celeb, where he is the poster child, right? So politics, you've got the legal side, and I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a lawyer, so I try to defer to people who know what they're talking about with specificity. I am a political guy. The politics of this, the Trump administration, I think, has to be careful about dotting their I's and crossing their T's for political reasons to make sure that they maintain strong public support for these deportations, which I think are essential. But on the flip side of it, the media, the Democrats, they've got to be careful about who they galvanize around and who they sanctify into this, major poster child of their cause. Because if it turns out that they've all rallied around an illegal immigrant who beat his wife, and Trump's saying, no, we want to keep that guy out of the country as a political matter, I think a lot of Americans will be like, I'm not really sure about this facilitate versus effectuate stuff. That's a bad dude who shouldn't be here. And politically, that's a win for Trump and a loss for the people who are trying to pretend like it's all about this principle of the rule of law. Last point. The same people, almost like if you did one of Kamala Harris's Venn diagrams.
I love Venn diagrams.
Loves them. It's almost a perfect circle. The people who are extremely concerned, talk about Mahmoud Khalil, the people who are suddenly really concerned about free speech, who are also totally fine with all the violations of free speech and cancel culture and the outrage mob. It's all the same people. They selectively choose when the principle applies, and otherwise they're actually against the principle. Same thing here. Some of the people, almost all of the people screaming loudest about the Maryland father had absolutely nothing to say about 4 years of 10 million illegal border crossings, deaths in the river, sexual assaults along the path to the United States, all the crimes from
child
Rachel Warren to
trafficking, all of it.
Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungaray, and the rest of them. They had nothing to say about any of it. They were complicit in it. In some cases, they cheered it on. But all of a sudden, the rule of law, after 4 years of mass scale law breaking, including victimization of Americans, all of a sudden, those people care deeply about the rule of law for this one guy who appears to be an illegal immigrant and a dirtbag at the very least.
Yeah.
It is hard for me to take that seriously. If you have been consistent, I'll have a listen. If you have not and didn't give a damn about the giant problem, have a seat. I'm really not interested.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there. And I think this is what's plaguing the Democrat Party. And so we'll finish with politics and just talk about this issue of, George Clooney now coming out and saying, I did my civic duty by writing that op-ed about Biden, even though days before he was on stage with Biden and saw what was going on. He waited until after the abysmal debate performance to pen an op-ed that said this guy is no longer qualified. All of these books are coming out. This is like it's the same thing you're talking about. Like for years, they told us Biden was sharp as a tack. Biden was running circles around everyone at the White House. Now, it's suddenly profitable to say, we really knew all along. I think the distrust of this party and look, they're saying it themselves. Clooney's saying it himself. We're totally unpopular. And I think it's not only are you unpopular, we just don't trust you and we don't believe you because you gaslit us for 4 freaking years. Not only about what's that?
Cheap fakes. Remember
that?
Cheap
fakes with Biden. All of this, the border is secure. The border is closed. Don't come. Hey, what would you say if Russia does this? Don't. And they did. And he did. And paid no consequence. So the Democrats seem in real trouble, and yet the people who are most active. So I often use my husband as a gauge for the average guy out there. Now he's right of center, but he's pretty centrist. And he said, who are the rational Democrats, if they exist? If not illiberals, but liberals, classic liberals, moderate Democrats exist. Where are they? I don't see them. I don't hear from them. So I don't even know they exist because all I see is AOC and Jasmine Crockett and Bernie Sanders. Where are they, Guy?
I mean, some of them exist. Certainly within the electorate. And I would say, I'll give a shout out to John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, the senator who
Fair enough.
is fairly sensible on a number of things. And I respect what he's done standing up to some of the crazy mobs in his own coalition. Richie Torres is a member of the House who I've gotten to know a little bit, who I think is really smart and sensible and
agree with that.
Pretty calm. We disagree on many things, but they're out there. But no, the oxygen is all sucked up.
Yeah.
These very loud, very extreme people who the base, that's what their base wants. That's what their base wants. And can I just go back to George Clooney just for one? Because I was asked about this today on Fox by Dana Perino. The problem with George Clooney's self-serving little monologue here about his civic duty. He's like, look, it was painful, but I had to do it for the country to blow the whistle on Joe Biden and say we have to, defenestrate him as the nominee. He has a timeline problem. And you alluded to it. Think about this. There were 3 events that I want to talk about. In mid-June of last year, there was that infamous fundraiser in LA, Clooney, Obama, Biden.
Julia Roberts.
Obama had to grab by the wrist Joe Biden and lead him off stage because he was wandering. We all saw that. They told us it was a cheap fake. George Clooney was front and center for all of that. He was one of the central players in that. That was mid-June. Late June came the debate where Biden completely imploded. He self-destructed. All the things that we knew happened, especially in like the first 20 minutes, which then became the big giant lie that they'd been pushing, that he was perfectly fine to serve 4 additional years as president, it exploded in the span of 20 minutes, at which point they had a political problem on their hands because they were going to get their asses kicked in the election if he had stayed in. And they all knew it. And then weeks after that, like 2 weeks later, Clooney bravely and courageously writes the op-ed, his civic duty, to warn about Biden and say, we've got to change him out, which they then did a few weeks later. If he had published the op-ed or spoken out publicly between the LA fundraiser and the debate, I might be willing to buy the fact that that was a civic duty moment. But it was after what happened in the debate and the polls collapsed that it became a partisan emergency for his party. He could have spoken out at actual risk to himself and his party for the good of the country, but he waited until we all saw it and it was completely undeniable and the polls changed. And then it became an issue about winning versus losing an election as opposed to the greater good and the civic duty. So like, spare me that sanctimony. You read the moment correctly. You couldn't have that guy stay on as your nominee, but don't be all uppity about it, like on your high horse that you did it for some sort of like really righteous reason.
You're right. If he had been really courageous about it, he would have intervened and said, do not let Joe Biden step on that debate stage. He cannot in his condition. We're going to lose this thing. And stepped in before.
I just hosted a fundraiser and here's what I saw.
Yeah.
We can't let this go on. If he had written that on like June 20th, different story. But it was July 10th that he wrote it, well after the debate went down. And so like just this virtuous performance. It's an additional layer of the gaslighting.
You're right. You're absolutely right. It's one more of these backtracking sort of these lies. He also said real quick in that CNN interview, as he was talking, he said, people on my side of the street, he kind of called it streets. And he said, and I'm a Democrat. I grew up a Kentucky Democrat, so I get it. That was kind of a little line he threw in that jumped out at me. What do you suppose he means by I grew up a Kentucky Democrat, so I get it?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the wider context of that was. Maybe
it was all in this context of, people on my side of the street weren't telling the truth about Joe Biden. My side of the street, meaning I'm a Democrat. I grew up a Kentucky Democrat, so I get it. I think in a way he was trying to distinguish himself from California Democrats, really, really super liberal Democrats. I don't know.
Could be. Very well. I mean, a Kentucky Democrat like Andy Beshear at least has to put on a different show than Gavin Newsom. Now, it's funny to watch Gavin Newsom. Let's face it, George Clooney has been a creature of Hollywood for so long that, I think Kentucky is far in his past or any sort of Kentucky values, it would seem.
Yeah.
I don't know his personal life.
He's more Italian than he is Kentucky at this point.
Politically. But it's interesting to watch Gavin Newsom starting to try to reinvent himself into something closer to an Andy Beshear or a Kentucky Democrat than what he actually is, which is like the most prominent left-wing Democratic governor in the country who's led all of these crazy fights, like at the tip of the spear. I think he senses a vibe shift in the country that he's trying to adjust for, but the base doesn't seem to want that. The base wants AOC, Jasmine Crockett, Bernie, and that crew. And we'll see how that plays out for them in 26. I think how the economy is looking will be paramount.
Huge, yeah.
And, 2028, it's the Democrats, at least so far, seem to be not learning any of the lessons of 2024. And maybe if Trump is so unpopular, the economy's in bad shape, it won't matter. They'll be rewarded for their lack of lesson learning, or they might get their butts kicked again because they are way, way out there and deeply off-putting to the middle of the country.
And there are more people in the middle than we know of, or than the average Joe knows. Like, I think people feel really alone. Like, am I the only one? And they're not. It's just that we don't hear from those people. They're not loud enough. They're not brash enough. They're not waving the shiny objects. They're not getting the airtime.
They don't want to get piled on by the loudest people on both sides.
Right.
Like, if you stick your head up sometimes with like kind of a more moderate position, you're not going to there's not like a built-in audience to be like, yeah, we agree. there is a built-in audience to be like, you suck.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just kind of keep that to themselves and go along with their day and figure it's it's not worth it.
I want to get one final thought from you. I was
Sure.
on Gutfeld the other night, and Tyrus and I disagreed on a topic, and I'd love to get your feelings. Bill Maher famously went to the White House. He could, biggest critic of Trump. I can't think of a bigger Trump critic than Bill Maher. He went in there, he sat down, and then came out and said, "I saw a different man than I thought that this man was.
Mhm.
I saw a different guy." Now, Tyrus argued Trump doesn't need Bill Maher. I don't think that's the point. I think Bill Maher speaks to an audience that if he didn't say it, no one else could convince them that Trump might be different than what they think. That's what I saw out of this. Real quick, what did you take away from that whole
Yeah.
saga?
Well, if he's watching, I agree with Tyrus because he's much larger than I am. But between us, Michelle, I think you're right. You're actually both sort of right. So Trump doesn't need Bill Maher.
No.
Because Bill Maher was not on his side in the election and Trump won the election, right? So in that sense, clearly true. But I think in terms of like our culture and public perception, to have someone who's been that relentlessly critical of Trump and right back at him too, like the list of insults that Bill Maher printed out and had Trump autograph it, which he did
That's great.
apparently like with glee, which is hilarious. It's genuinely very funny that he did that.
Is.
To have them come together and have that meeting and for Bill Maher to come out and say, you might hate me, but here's my report of what happened. And for it to shine a light on a different side of Trump that people on the left, many of them don't want to acknowledge exists at all. They want him to be this one-dimensional gargoyle cartoon.
Yes.
And if you give any texture to him or any additional dimension to him in a way that might reflect, God forbid, well on him or in an interesting way, that's almost to some of the hardcore leftists seen as a betrayal because you're like you're humanizing someone who shouldn't be humanized because he's so terrible. So for Maher to agree to this and for Trump to agree to it and for them to have this experience and have it not spiral into a bad thing, which it very much could have, and they could have gone back to screaming at each other on social media and attacking each other in the press, for them to actually have a pleasant interaction and for Maher to, I think in a very transparent way, talk about that is a healthy thing.
Thank you. Healthy because it also shows, you know what, we really can talk to each other. If Bill Maher and Donald Trump can talk to each other, we ought to be able to talk to each other. Maybe a lot of us are not what you think we are. And so, I appreciated it. I thought it was a great moment for Maher. And, a willingness to say, okay, fine, I'm going to take my page of insults and go see what I get. And to be honest about it afterwards. I thought that took some, I don't know if courage is the right word, but the audience he speaks to certainly didn't want to hear that, but he told them anyway.
Mm-hmm. I agree. If he's being truthful, it seems like he's being truthful about it. I think it's an integrity moment.
Yeah.
Where, he just said, to borrow a phrase that you might have heard elsewhere in a different context, we report, you decide. Here's what happened. Let me tell you what happened. I was there. I was one of the two people. You can make of it what you will. And he had a bunch of caveats in there and took shots at Trump and jokes at his expense. And, it wasn't just some sort of love fest, right?
Right.
It was fairly nuanced.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to me. I played a lot of it on my show because I thought it was interesting and sort of maybe important is too big of a word, but like meaningful in some way.
Yeah.
I think I'm leaning your direction on this one, even though Tyrus is literally correct that in the election, for example, Trump did not have and then did not need Bill Maher.
Correct. And that's fine. And but there were a lot of Democrats he did not have or need, and I think they would be well served to maybe also be as open-minded to who this human is.
The whole point of politics is to expand the universe of people who would at least consider voting for you, right? That's kind of the whole game.
Exactly right. Oh, you're no game, but if you were a game, you'd be fun one, and I'd play it every time. He is Guy Benson. Listen to him on GuyBensonShow.com, Fox News Radio, all over the place. Always great to see you. We'll look forward to doing it again. Thanks for playing along.
Thanks, Michelle.
And as I say every time I close the podcast, be brave, do good, and we'll see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.